welcome to Blueprints for Modern Government Experience, brought to you by KPMG. I'm your host, George Jackson. It's a pivotal moment in history for supporting government missions. Agencies have a great responsibility to meet citizen needs and simultaneously manage rapidly evolving technologies and practices, dramatically changing customer expectations. The leaders you meet today are working to ensure that their organization's customer experience meets or exceeds the experience offered by household names. It's part of a larger push to improve the relationship and trust citizens share with their government. Let's kick things off with Adriane Burton, Chief Information Officer at the Health Resources and Services Administration, Barbara Morton, Deputy Chief Veterans Experience Officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Colt Whitehall, Chief User Experience Officer at the U.S. Air Force, and here in studio with me, Christina Melton, Advisory Experience Design Director and Transformation Delivery Lead at KPMG. Christina, because you're here in studio with me, I'm going to pick on you first. Tell me a little bit about, the scope of work that you're doing in CX right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. The scope of work that we're doing, it's really I feel it's a transformational time. And I would say especially this last year really has a lot to do with organizations really looking at the scope and the breadth of the services that they offer and how they offer them. And so we've seen a really big shift in a lot of in-person activities, even if they were okay in the past, and really thinking about how do we create or recreate those experiences in a digital context, one where folks don't have to rely on walking in and meeting with a physical person or individual, but things that are focused more on self-service in that regard. And I would say that's really across the board. In terms of customer experience. And also, I think it's interesting as well because it's not just, as we see this, the end users, so be it the citizens, the constituents, folks like that are kind of at the end of receiving a service. It's also how do the employees that are serving these folks, how are they supported? What tools do they have? How do we enable them? And also the other people in between, where you have the administrators of the actual technology and the business itself, and it's this holistic user experience and really looking at all the different facets across the entire landscape.
That's great. Thanks for setting the table. Adriane, what's going on at HRSA? What are you working on in CX right now?
We're working on the COVID-19 response. We have a program called the Provider Relief Program, so we've been focused on pushing out $175 billion to healthcare providers and hospitals. In addition to the Provider Relief Fund, we've been focusing on pushing out grants to support our health centers and our various programs in response to COVID-19. In addition, we've been focusing on vaccination equity. So those have been some of our key focuses over the last year and a half.
Let's go over to Barbara. Tell us what's happening at VA in the area of CX.
Well, thanks so much for having us here. It's a lot of wonderful things happening at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And one thing that I love about the space of customer experience is that you're really able to sort of respond to and adapt to certain priorities of the day. And so for us, in addition to sustaining customer experience as a core business discipline at VA, supporting the entire department, whether it's healthcare benefits, memorial services, appeals, we're also supporting the value and virtue of inclusivity, diversity, and equity. And so we have a lot of projects now that we're focused on using human-centered design to really more deeply understand underserved veteran populations like tribal veterans, female veterans, to then be able to translate those insights into concrete tools and actions to better improve those experiences. We're also really focusing on the employee experience as well, as Christina mentioned. So one of the things that we're starting to do is apply the proven framework that we've utilized over the last few years, again, starting with human-centered design, into the employee experience space. So we've done VA's first ever employee experience journey map, and now we're doing some deeper dives into pain points that employees have shared with us, one of which is onboarding, and anybody who's ever been in government knows that onboarding can be a difficult time. So we're really excited to apply that framework to these two particular spaces.
I want to pull on some of those threads later on in our program here. And the other topic that I've heard you talk about before, Barbara, the cookbook concept.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's zip over to Colt. Colt, you have a unique title inside of all DoD, Chief User Experience Officer. At least for right now, you're the only one of your kind, a bit of a unicorn. What are you working on at Air Force?
Sure. So my role is really about, it's a little bit different. Adriane and Barbara are focused primarily on citizen-facing customer experience and user experience. And my role is about really warfighter effectiveness of the airmen. So my audience is a bit smaller. It's the active duty, Guard, Reserve, and civilians in the Air Force. And my job is to make them more effective. The information technology that they use has got to be fast. It's got to be reliable, resilient, easy to use, requires little training as possible, requires little documentation as possible. We need to turn it around and deliver it much faster and in a much more responsive way to changing missions. And I could go on. And so I work for the CIO of the Air Force. And I focus both on enterprise IT, so let's make networks, PCs, and all of that much faster and simpler and more reliable. And then I also support the software development communities, and there are many. We have a portfolio, really we have many portfolios of applications in the Air Force, many of which serve more than 500,000 users. So I work closely with them as well. So we've got to make it all better. We've got to make the warfighter more effective.
A lot of common themes coming out there, Christina, but I want to start with people. You know, we've heard from our government guests who represents the C in that CX component. Some are internal, some are external. I mean, as these organizations are beginning to develop strategies and pursuing improvements to CX, would you suggest that they start with the people, or if not, where do they start?
I would say that they should start with the people, and that's one of the shifts over the last several years that I've seen become at the forefront and center. And that is simply because people are at the heart of any sort of transformation, technology, implementation. You really have to understand, and it goes beyond just, I need, these 3 tools to be successful, right? And you can take that very literally to, I need an email application, or I need a chat mechanism to chat with my colleagues, to really understanding human behavior. One of the things that we do for human-centered design is really understand how do folks like you and I, how do we perceive the world, and how do we interact with our day-to-day? And I think some of it was already mentioned with especially the Air Force comments around the environment, or even with the VA, and even thinking about medical situations, because it extends beyond a digital experience, it extends beyond those specific tools, but really how we interact as humans, and what motivates us to get our work done in those respects, and also to continue engagement with one another. And so through all of that, you have the different types of behavior. And once you start to understand that, you see the trends within your population, whether it's customers, users, as we want to call them, end users, or employees, and you really start to think of developing tools or acquiring different technologies that really serve the true needs of those people.
Adriane, I want to get to what we're talking about around priorities, and what Christina mentions here, the priorities sort of driving better CX. In your initial remarks, you mentioned the work that you've been doing around the pandemic and grants. And at least from what I was reading, one of those top priorities was, I guess I'd call it speed to mission, kind of cutting down the lengthy grant process, speeding that up so that money can kind of get out where it needs to go. Am I reading that right?
Yes. So to award a grant, typically it would take anywhere from 120 to 90 days. What we did is our system is automated. What we did is we automated the process for the grantees to apply. So during COVID, what we did is that we submitted the applications for our existing grantees. And by doing that, we were able to reduce the time from 120 to 90 days to 18 days, and then 12 days, and then 5 days to push grants out. So that just really helped tremendously to have a huge impact on the healthcare community.
Barbara, talk a little bit about the user-centered design that you mentioned in your initial remarks. What does that look like? And for organizations that are really just looking to begin making an impact in CX, what have you learned that they should maybe take on first, second, third in those journeys?
Sure. I mean, I think every agency is different and every culture is really different. So the starting point, I think, is going to vary. But I can tell you from a VA perspective, we started based on a catalyst, which some may remember. Our catalyst was the Phoenix VA Medical Center crisis back in April 2014. And that was sort of a wake-up call for us as a department that we really needed to more deeply understand the experiences of those that we served. And so one of the places that we started, of course, was this industry best practice of applying human-centered design. And we began with a macro journey map for veterans. So this was sort of an end-to-end from enlistment all the way through transition, starting a career, aging, retiring. We really wanted to understand at a macro level, what were the moments that matter most to veterans in their journey, and how might VA best fit into those moments that matter to support them? So we really started at an enterprise level, a high level. From that point, though, what we wanted to do is really start to prove the concept of the value of human-centered design and customer experience as a business discipline in government. At the time, it was relatively new. It still is relatively new, but we partnered with our friends in the healthcare space at VA to do our first ever healthcare experience journey map. And that was just incredibly revealing because we started to drill down into a more specific area to best understand the moments that matter and the pain points for veterans in the healthcare space. And from there, we've really built a suite of these kind of tangible tools, trainings, leadership practices at scale in partnership with the Veterans Health Administration to really rebuild trust and create that emotional resonance and connectivity across the system.
If I could stay with you just for a second, Barbara, from what I was reading, it seems like transparency or a concerted effort toward being more transparent through the data that you were putting out has paid dividends for the VA, that over time, because you've been sort of tracking CX and how veterans are sort of reacting to the changes that you've been making, that it kind of fuels that, it improves it as it goes along. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us at VA, because of where we started on this journey, trust is really our main currency, and that's our North Star. That's what we're aiming towards. And I would say that that's probably true across federal government at large. There are so many drivers in our orbit today that really help us orient towards that goal. We've got the OMB A11 directive, which really is focusing agencies on building trust by using a specific framework, and a number of other sort of external drivers for us, but really kind of getting back in touch with the veteran at ground level to build that trust and to be able to report that out on a regular and transparent basis, I think is really important. One of the things that we have done in the past is we've, on a quarterly basis, as part of an agency priority goal, have reported trust at VA. And Secretary McDonough, who's our new secretary, wanted to take that a step further. So now we are posting what we call a trust report on our website, and it is updated regularly. So veterans and other partners of ours can see how we are doing. It's our report card in a very transparent way.
Colt, I want to switch gears a bit and talk about software development. Forgive my ignorance, but how does that and CX kind of link up? Where is CX and software development? Where do those come together?
Come together everywhere. Some of the most important tools that airmen use today in their work are software, and they're all over the place, right? They're part of weapon systems. They're, and like I said earlier, we have literally thousands of applications in the Air Force, and so where it intersects as far as what I'm doing, I tend to focus on the ones that affect practically everybody. And like I said earlier, we have at least 25 applications that serve north of 500,000 airmen. And a lot of those are very outdated. Some of them are 10, 20 years old, and they need a lot of work. And in some cases, there's key business processes like in and out processing, or what we call PCSing, permanent change of station, that just really aren't automated very well at all. And so, from my perspective, where I get involved in this is working with our software development organizations. We call them software factories and software engineering groups, or SWEGs, and just some of the big acquisition programs to help them do strategic hires, to help them work on their process, to help them get funding to go do things that they need to do to tackle some of these, what I call mega, user journeys. And then, focus on the things that are going to impact our users the most. I even put together at one point something called the CXO's 10 Most Wanted, which are the applications most derided by airmen. And it's not too hard to figure out what they are. Frankly, you can go out on social media and do a bit of research and come up with a list pretty fast.
We used to do a segment when I was on the air in East Tennessee called On the Most Wanted. It was more applied to criminals. It's funny applying that to software there. Christina, before we went on the air, you had talked about how the terms have evolved for CX. We've heard from our government speakers here. They're all leading in their respective ways. What stands out from what they've said, and does it align with, your view that these terms have evolved?
Sure. So I remember early on when I started my career, I was doing web design, and user experience, the buzzword kind of came up, and I was like, oh, that's exactly what I'm doing. I just never framed it that way, right? Like I was understanding, who my users were, what they needed from the website, right, where they needed to go, kind of the scent of information, as it could be called. And then it just kind of evolved over time from kind of user experience, sometimes user-centered design, human-centered design, customer experience, employee experience. And really, semantics aside, it's about the people, because people are at the heart of all of these different experiences. And so really, I don't know that it matters what name you're talking about, as long as your focus is on the people that are at the center.
Adriane, you have a long and storied federal career that spans a lot of different agencies, IRS, NIH, now over at HRSA. Take us through a little bit of the evolution that Christina's talking about here, and maybe what the next step is for CX. You've seen it come a long way. What's next up?
Well, for us, we try to focus on our internal users as well as our external users. So when you think about our external users, those are the grantees. And what we try to do is to get feedback from our grantees on a regular basis through a grantee satisfaction survey, or through like an all grantees meeting, or through technical assistance. So we try to take that feedback and integrate that into our systems to make them more user friendly. And then in regards to internal customers, we have different surveys that go out to our customers, and we have a lot of stakeholder work groups that exist across the organization to get feedback to make sure that the systems are actually meeting the needs of the people. So the mission drives first are not IT. So we just try to make sure that we're keeping our customers at the forefront of everything that we do, and that we have a feedback cycle where we get feedback and make adjustments as needed. So whether it be external customers, our grantees, internal customers, or healthcare providers, it depends on what type of program we're working on, but we try to keep our customers at the forefront.
Barbara, in media, we love similes, metaphors, analogies, and I want to get back to the cookbook here. Tell us about that concept, and maybe if you've picked up any ingredients based off of this conversation.
Well, I'm a foodie, so I had to kind of have some sort of analogy, metaphor that was digestible for everyone. Had to say that. So the impetus behind the cookbook really stemmed from our cross-agency work as part of the President's Management Agenda, cross-agency priority goal on improving customer experience with federal services. And this was a cycle from 2018 to 2020. And at the end of that work, we were co-leads with OMB and a number of other sister agencies. We really wanted to put together a resource that was practical, that our brothers and sisters could utilize to either build or develop or grow a customer experience capability. One of the things about being in government for so long, as all of us have been, is you understand sort of the mechanisms or the ingredients, as we call them, to really make transformational change in government. And there are a variety of them. I think we captured up to 60 of them in the cookbook. And there are things that I mentioned before, like an agency priority goal. That's going to get time, energy, attention because it's a public reporting aspect that really needs senior leadership attention. So thinking about customer experience as one of those goals year over year has been key to helping us really kind of plant this capability across VA. You think about performance plans. How do we hold people accountable, and organizationally, how do we hold ourselves accountable? So at VA, we have senior executives now who have performance requirements specifically relating to customer experience and now employee experience. So there's so many different options. And as I said at the outset, every agency culture is different. And so I think knowing where your culture is, knowing the different priority areas and sort of how you can orient your agency and your group towards these priorities using these ingredients and levers, I think is really, really key. And we really hope it's a useful resource to our brothers and sisters across government as well.
Colt, in the minute or two we have left, I'd like to talk about workforce. You brought a fresh perspective to the Air Force. You came from private sector. You've done a lot of work all across the landscape. And I'm curious, as you've onboarded and settled in there, what you've seen as far as realigning the workforce to improve CX. Like, not just the Air Force, but government in general, what do you have to do to sort of realign that workforce effectively?
Great question. I mean, as in my prior professional services life, one of the consulting partners I worked for, explained to me, and he said, everything good and bad in this business comes from who you put on the account, who's on the project. And so you got to have the right talent in the organization, or you're just not going to get the results you want. So big thing that I focus on is we need to get CX and UX, user experience, or user-centered design or customer-centered design. We need to get that experience. We need to get those skills in the Air Force. And, I'm happy to, and we will always engage a lot of contractors, but we need a lot of those people on our staff and in our organizations. And so I have a set of kind of key priorities that I talk to all of our software development organizations about. And the biggest one is emphasizing a UX design to developer ratio. And there's a ratio that I want them to hit, and it can vary a little bit from software factory to acquisition or wherever. But I preach it, I advocate for it, I help them figure out ways to get it. And then after that, we start talking tools and process and other things, because the key is getting the right people and getting them access. If they get the right people in the organization, then all of those other things will follow. So huge emphasis of mine. Also work on a few key, strategic hires in certain places where they have the ability to influence a broad portfolio of systems that are critical to overall, airman experience.
Well, that's great, folks. We're out of time. I could talk about CX all day. Colt, Adriane, Barbara, Christina here in studio, thanks for being here. After the break, we'll continue the conversation with a group of leaders working to meet the moment by applying innovative approaches designed to reimagine customer experience. You're watching Blueprints for Modern Government on GovExec TV. I'll be right back. Welcome back to Blueprints for Modern Government Experience on GovExec TV. I'm George Jackson. More and more often, digital experiences constitute our first impression in a new relationship. Many of us work from home. We connect with our government from a variety of devices. First impressions mean a lot, even in this digital, customer-driven world. Today, human-centric design and equitable delivery can help public sector organizations create better experiences for nearly everyone. Here now, Andre Dumitrescu, Chief Data Officer for the State of Tennessee Division of TennCare. Here in studio with me, Arthur Higbee. He is Advisory Managing Director and Transformation Delivery Lead at KPMG. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. I'm going to start locally. Arthur, you got to listen in because you're in studio with the prior segment. Those guests, federal, DOD, a little bit of a different focus than state, which we'll be focusing on during this portion of our conversation. But link those two for me. What did you hear from that conversation that also applies at the state level?
Well, what I was really struck by was just what a focus experience has been at the federal level. I know working with state and local governments, we have our federal partners, and throughout the pandemic, they've shown such flexibility, regulatory flexibility, and partnership with the state and local government. So I was really struck by what import it's had, customer experience, constituent experience in the technology that's being delivered today.
Andre, let's go over to you and give us a sense, a lay of the land of CX-wise, what you're doing in Tennessee. Give us some background, maybe some evolution on how CX became a thing and where you're pushing that today.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I just wanted to reiterate, I agree with Arthur. I think the partnership from the federal level, the flexibility has been invaluable because our agency, TennCare, is the Medicaid agency for the state of Tennessee. So we work together with Center for Medicaid Studies to deliver coverage to over 1.5 million citizens of our state. And so when we talk about the experience, we really have to think about them. We have to think about our clients and what they expect from us. How do we deliver information to them? How do they in turn return information to us or get answers from us when they need it? And so having, over the past few years, having undergone a dramatic modernization effort that is still ongoing, I can share that we've made some significant strides. We've moved away from kind of classic, say, paper exchange of documents, moved away from them having to come into our local offices and being able to use web portals, being able to use smartphone apps to collect information, to share information with us, much more streamlined, and it's much more accommodating to their day, right? And being able to work and care for their children and everything that they need to do without having to worry about coming to office or finding a fax machine or having to make copies and mail something that could get lost. So we've put a lot of focus in the user experience specific to our members, and it's paying dividends for sure. And at the same time, we also have to worry about some of our other clients. We have to worry about the thousands of providers and partners we have across the state. And we also have to worry internally about our various parts of the agency and our employees speaking the same language, working in lockstep towards achieving the agency goals. So I think the experience is not limited just to our members and the public, but it's a multifaceted issue, really.
Does that complicate things, Arthur, this sort of multifaceted definition of customer? Do you have to develop a set of strategies for kind of each bucket there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we use the term customer even in government, right? And I think we've started using constituent as well, just because there are so many players. A lot of times with the commercial clients I've been working with, you have the luxury of focusing on just your customers and then your employees, but there are a number of different stakeholders at play with each of these digital transformations that governments are going through now. So the landscape gets more complicated, and there's certainly more politics involved in negotiating through all of that. But bottom line, it comes down to expectations. And what we found is that only a third of people feel that government is meeting their expectations and delivering services. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. And expectations are really high. If you look at what we're able to do with our phones, I mean, we can, with Uber, we can see when the cars are arriving. My kids can see when pizza's coming from Domino's. So in this information age, I think the expectations for information are that it's real time, that it's delivered quickly, that you can see where you're at in a certain process. And yet you look at governments and you see, black box recruitment processes. Even as the person that's being recruited in, you don't know where you're at in the process. So there's a lot of room for improvement in the experience space.
Andre, you mentioned this shift away from paper, this shift to making more accommodations for folks working from home. I mean, these are pretty massive changes, and they take a lot, from your office, for the partners that you work with. Do you expect those to stick, or are these temporary changes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I will say we're lucky in our agency that even pre-pandemic, we had been experimenting and pushing towards a work from home flexibility. It wasn't nearly of the scale we experienced suddenly, right, in 2020. But we were working with our teams to see who can work from home, whether it's 1 or 2 days a week. So the technology, whether it's Zoom and everything, was being evaluated. The teams were prepared and were used to working with a mixture of people being in the room and some people being remote. So we were fortunately on that path. But I will say that like many others, we were thrust into a 24/7 work from home environment, and we have been working from home since. We haven't gone back to the building in any meaningful way. Long term, I would say we're not sure yet. We are certainly prepared to do more work from home than we did before. We have certain parts of the agency where everybody will work from home permanently. At the same time, we have other parts of the agency that need to be in person. And so they will be in the office. They will still be in the office some measurable amount. And I imagine that the large, I will call it middle majority, will be in a hybrid environment. Couple of days home, couple of days in the office, and just retain as much flexibility as possible, be available when you're needed, and leverage all the technology we can, which has also made significant strides, I would say, over the past few years. Whether it's the video conferencing, whether it's IP phones and everything, whether it's even office suites, having collaboration tools built in so that you can still do the work that you used to do before in the same room, but now you can be hundreds, if not more, thousands of miles away from each other.
We're getting to the technology here, which we haven't really dug into just yet. Arthur, I mean, I alluded to in the previous part of this program the expectations, heightened expectations, if you will, of that C in CX. What do people expect? What type of experience do they expect on that mobile device or that laptop or that tablet?
Well, it's interesting. If we go back in time a little bit, March of 2020, I was working with a client, and the primary aim of the client was to deliver food cash and medical benefits. So the project that we were on was to go through a digital transformation, really to focus on replacing all of that technology in order to deliver better access to benefits, to standardize access to benefits, and to better support customers. We walked out the door that day, I think knowing pretty well that we weren't going to be back for a while. Still haven't quite come back. But because the client was in an in-person service delivery model, which worked very well up until that point, there was really a desperate need to switch to a digital model. And so we took them and we developed a mobile application. It was remarkable, having spent so much time with them on the back end, to flip the script, look at the front end, and really focus on the system of engagement. And despite the fact that the systems of record, they had quite a few systems. They had, an integrated eligibility and enrollment system. They had document management system, a workflow system, all of which were legacy applications. But because of mobile technology, we were able to tap into that, integrate directly to that, and get that into the market within a couple of months. We actually had it ready to go, the first version, in 4 weeks. But as soon as we put that in the market, the adoption was instant. I mean, partly the pandemic, right? I mean, the option of going on your phone. But since the delivery model has opened back up, we've found that the vast majority of people choose the digital model because it's just so much easier to apply for benefits, to check your benefits, to upload documents, to do everything digitally. So I think expectations now are that, why do I need to come in person if I can do something through my phone? So that digital model, I don't see that going away. I see that actually accelerating. And I think what we've seen through the pandemic was the flexibility that we had from regulators and the determination that our clients had to help keep people safe, really expanded what they thought was possible in the market. And so while bureaucracies tend to reassert themselves over time, and we certainly see that with some of our clients that are starting to move back into looking at their full technology landscape, I don't see us going back. I think keeping that focus, that technology focus on the system of engagement is critical going forward.
Yeah. Andre, I think what Arthur's getting to here is the data portion of your Chief Data Officer title. This shift away from paper to, an app-based delivery method can fuel better CX efforts. Am I reading that right? Is that a connection that you actively make inside of, Tennessee's offices?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that I echo everything that Arthur has said. We're not going back. If anything, we're accelerating. And we have to bring the modernization not just to some facets of our business, but to every facet of our business. And so, while large areas are on the right path, you can always find kind of the hidden corners, right? That, to his point, the bureaucracy has resisted. And so you need to develop incentives, right, for every part of the agency to move forward and essentially develop those cost-benefit analyses, the plans, and move everybody forward. But to your point in terms of data, yes, almost everything that we do, almost every effort at our agency is driven by data, whether it's the provision of healthcare, kind of our core mission, whether it's our partnerships with research agencies, whether it's responses to kind of critical issues facing our citizens, whether it's the opioid epidemic or the recent COVID pandemic. It is all driven by data, sharing data, having good, high quality data that is readily available for the governor's office, for our agency, and for our partners to use towards satisfying their strategic goals. And so our efforts are always to make that data as trusted as possible, as available as possible, and to offer high quality data that our users can just jump straight into solutioning of a problem without having to worry about, reconciliation of the data. Where did it come from? Is it high quality? Do I trust this? We strive to answer all those questions for them and let them get to do what they do best, which is provide solutions for our members, provide care, provide coverage.
Arthur, let's talk about budgets briefly. Not just limited to the state of Tennessee here, but across the sort of state level of government, budgets are not unlimited. When someone like Andre looks at, better providing services to these 1.5 million citizens in the Division of TennCare that they represent, that's a daunting number. That's a big group. CX, I think, could sometimes sort of fall by the wayside as folks focus on mission. Why should they sort of not do that? And what steps can they take, budgetarily, that are a little bit less daunting? Where should they start?
Yeah, it's interesting because there has been an evolution, I think, and Christina spoke to this in the earlier segment about the way that the thinking around experience has evolved over time. And I think there's a tendency to think of focusing on customer experience as a nice to have, as a window dressing for the transformation that you're going through. And what we found over time is, in fact, if you have worked on and your trust in the data is there, you have the technology stack that you can actually put out systems of engagement rapidly, the focus on customer is actually mission critical. And so what I would say to the budget question is focus on those services that you're providing that are absolutely critical to your mission, and listen to your customers. Put them at the core of what you're doing. Your constituents are the center of that. And it's, of course, we're dazzled by the beautiful interfaces and the brand and the nice looking documentation and so forth. But really what it's about is deeply understanding how people can translate information into action that's critical for your mission.
Andre, let's close with you, and I want to ask you to build on that point. I mean, is that an easy case to make inside Tennessee? Better customer service, better constituent service?
It is. And I think it goes back to the question of who is the customer. So if we look at the citizen being the customer, then what I mentioned, right? A better way to interact with our citizens, easier, more convenient ways to share and receive information with them. It can be an easy sell, right? Yes, there's an investment, but it can cause improvement in the type of care we provide, the experience we provide, and it allows us to be more efficient in doing it. What if we look at our clients as our employees, then improving the technology can allow them to, again, be more efficient in how they do things, whether it's our cloud first shift. I can give you an example in terms of a data warehouse or a decision support system that in a modern implementation, it can use artificial intelligence, it can use machine learning to highlight trends, whether it's trends in usage of services, trends in, prescribing of pharmaceuticals. And it allows our medical teams to then focus on what is important, right? Maybe that initial discovery step can be aided by the technology, and it lets them spend their time where they'll get kind of the biggest impact, right? And they'll make the biggest difference. So I think at its core, technology is critical, but we have to understand the customer. And as Arthur said, they are the key beneficiary here. And we have to think, how can we use the technology to improve the services we deliver to more people, or to the people where we deliver them better services in a more cost-efficient manner.
Great insight today from Andre Dumitrescu, joining us remotely from Tennessee. Andre, thanks for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was my privilege.
And here in studio, Arthur Higbee, KPMG. Arthur, thanks for teaching us a thing or two today.
Thank you, George. Thanks, Andre.
And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. Join me back here on December 1st for the next installment of Blueprints for Modern Government Digital. For GovExec TV, I'm George Jackson.